My name is Rob Davies. I work at the Cyprus University of Technology, and we are leading Activity 6 in the Common Culture Project, which is about capacity building in the Europeana ecosystem. And this webinar series, which is one of them, is part of that work. I'm aware that there's quite a few webinars coming out of the Europeana camp at the moment, and that's a great thing at this COVID time. I think once COVID is done, there'll be some effort to coordinate the various streams of webinar production so they become maybe easier to follow. But anyway, this is the second in our series, and I'd like to introduce our speakers today. The first is Sara Di Georgio, who's currently leading a team for the development of Cultura Italia, the Italian national aggregator, which collects digital resources from thematic, national and regional portals and databases in the world of Italian culture. She's been involved in a number of projects, including Europeana Reusable Literacy, Daria IT, Parthenos, ERIS, and the European Open Science Cloud. And in Parthenos, she coordinated the activities for the definition of user requirements, data policy, and implementation of guidelines around IPR, open data, and open access. So all that's very relevant to FAIR. And the second speaker is Franco Niccolucci, the director of the VAST Lab at PIN in Prato in Italy. He has a background in mathematics and was a professor at the University of Florence until 2008. And then until 2013 was also working, as I am now, in Cyprus at the Science and Technology and Archaeology Research Centre, STARC, at the Cyprus Institute in Nicosia. He was the coordinator of the EU-funded Parthenos project, which is very much at the core of today's webinar. It's a cluster of research infrastructures in the domains of digital humanities, language studies and cultural heritage, and he's currently the coordinator of the Ariadne Plus project on digital archaeology. And our third speaker today is joining us is Henning Scholz, who many of you may know. Henning is the manager of the data publishing services at Europeana. And after I've mediated the session on any questions from you, and please do fill in the form with questions or put questions on the chat section of Zoom, and we'll pull those together. But Henning, in any case, after that, we'll share a few questions with you asking you to respond using the MentiMeter tool at the end of the session. So I think that concludes the introductions, and I'd like then to hand over now, I think, to our first speaker, Sara.
Maybe. So this is the floor of Franco. He will introduce the FAIR data principle. Franco? Franco?
Okay, good morning, everybody. This is today's webinar is an introduction to the FAIR principles. Maybe some of you already are aware of what the FAIR principles are about. Let me just recall them. They concern data organization, and they aim at improving data discovery, access, and reuse by humans, but also by computational systems without any human intervention. So one of the most important features is that they are machine actionable. The principle focused on 4 aspects which will be examined today. That is findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. Next slide, please.
Oh, I don't know. There is something that I can control the slide. Adina, could you take over the slide? Because I can't. I don't know why. Okay.
Okay, so let's put the FAIR principles in a historical perspective. The discussion started in 2014 at a workshop held in Leiden, but it took some ideas already around concerning open science. The principles were focused and clearly expressed in a pretty famous paper in 2016 by a very large grouping of scientists who formulated then in a very precise and formal way. The FAIR principles are being supported by the EU Commission, and their implementation is results from the recommendations of international projects and organizations like the Research Data Alliance, which is a very large international project concerning the data organization and management and processing. Next one, Sara, if you're able to.
Yeah.
So now we have a couple of slides concerning the reasons to adopt the FAIR principles. This one is focused on the social advantages, so global advantages of the adoption. They foster collaboration and cross-fertilization because they are a way of implementing the open science concept. There is a big saving of money. A study by the European Commission a couple of years ago concluded that by adopting the FAIR principles, the society could save 10 billion euros per year. They save time because there is no double work. It is evaluated that 85% of the time currently spent in searching data could be saved if everybody adopts the FAIR principle. As already mentioned, machine actionability is also very important in our age of artificial intelligence, big data, and so on. Enabling computers to directly access and reprocess data is a very important feature. And last but not least, they are nowadays widely adopted by international organizations like UNESCO, G7, the European Commission, and several national governments, and in our domain of libraries and digital humanities by LIBER, the Association of Scientific Libraries. Next slide. Of course, there are also advantages for researchers, not only for the society as a whole, but also for individuals. They encourage scientific inquiry and debate because you can access directly the raw data. They promote innovation and potential new data users. They foster new collaborations because if somebody uses my data, it is likely that we are working on the same topic and we can create collaborations and joint research teams. They maximize transparency and accountability. So, very often in science, but also in the humanities, it is useful to be able to go back to the data from which the conclusions perhaps contained in a scientific article on a journal are based. And so the FAIR principles enable scrutiny of research methods and findings. They reduce the cost of duplicating data collection. If I can use data created by somebody else, I will not need to do it myself again. They increase the impact and visibility of research, and also one may get credit for research output. So they push up quotations of my own work if others reuse my data. And actually they increase citation rates because not only the conclusions, but also the data must be quoted. And last but not least, this is not an advantage, it's an obligation. Adopting FAIR principles is nowadays mandatory for many funders, governments, funding agencies, and so on, including the European Commission, by the way. Next slide. This presentation is based on previous work done within Parthenos. A leaflet was prepared with 20 guidelines to data verification. And how to make data usable. Of course, this is an introductory booklet. There are many other documents concerning the adoption of the FAIR principles, which you may be interested in if you want to go ahead on the way of making your data fair. Next slide.
So
Sara, it's up to you now.
Yeah, I will present you briefly these 20 recommendations, but the first, it's a prerequisite. It means invest in people and infrastructure, because to be able to implement the rest of the 19 guidelines in this guide, institutions should invest in data infrastructures and in hiring and educating data experts to guarantee data management support, maintenance, and long-term preservation. It is worth reflecting on the work required to develop and maintain data infrastructure, as well as the people and the process required to make them successful. Participation in this process has been often limited by lack of investment in the creation of the infrastructure and its management. The recommendation for data producers and researchers is to get aware of best practice in research data management, and you can have a look to the PARTHENOS training modules on data management that cover a wide range of awareness levels, requirements, and topic areas within the landscape of research infrastructure in the digital humanities. For data archives, should invest in hiring and educating data experts and define a budget for making investments in technical infrastructure and staff, providing support when determining the cost of data management, as this is typically underestimated or unknown. So when we talk about findability, we mean that data should be easy to find by both humans and computer systems, and based on mandatory descriptions of the metadata that allows the discovery of interesting data sets. To make data findable, we have 4 recommendations. The first is to use persistent identifier. To be findable, any data or digital object should be identifiable by a unique and persistent identifier, such as a .i or a UN. The identifier enables persistent linkage to be established between the data, the metadata, and other related materials in order to assist data discovery and reuse during time, when they are made available both via online and offline environments. It supports citation and reuse to be tracked. The second recommendation is to cite the research data. If research data have a persistent identifier and are cited in accordance with community standards, the corresponding data objects or data sets are more easily found. For researcher data producer, the recommendation is to follow discipline-specific citation guidelines and standards, because each discipline in the humanities has its own best practice for citing literature and other external data. For cultural heritage institution or research institution, it is important to provide information about best practice in data citation for research community and make it easy for data user to cite data by using, for example, appropriate explanation on how to cite these data sets. The third recommendation that is very important for cultural heritage sector indeed is the use of persistent author identifiers. A persistent author identifier, such as the Virtual International Authority File, the International Standard Name Identifier, or the Open Research and Contributing ID, the ORCID, helps to create connection between datasets, research activities, publication, and researchers, and allows recognition and discoverability. For data producer, it is important to have an ID that uniquely attaches to your identity to your research work, such as your articles and datasets. In this way, no more confusion because the author or researcher has the same or similar name. You get a credit for your work, distinguish yourself from any other researcher or research group. For CSIs, by the reference uniform author identifiers in the metadata for entities named in the library authority file, such as a personal, corporate, or jurisdictional name. Oh, sorry. The 4th recommendation for making data findable is to choose an appropriate metadata schema. Metadata is an essential requisite in making data findable, especially the metadata which is used for citing and describing data or content. A metadata schema is a list of standardized elements to capture information about a resource, such as title, identifier, creator name, or date. Using an existing metadata schema will ensure that international standards for exchange are met. For data producer, to enable the discovery of content, describe research data as constantly and completely as possible. Include enough information for data to be accessed and understood over time. If possible, use an existing standard metadata schema which fits the type of data object or data set you are describing. For cultural heritage institution or research institution, clearly state which metadata schema you apply and recommend to your community. To enrich data sets at data deposit, consider having a data submission form which collects additional metadata, for example, about the provenance of the data. So to sum up the guidelines on Findable, they are mainly focused on metadata schema and identifier. Humanists work with a variety of sources from archives, museums, and libraries and survey, and each of them requires a specific metadata standards. The main message is to make use of the right fields to describe the digital object and to provide rich enough metadata and contextual documentation to enable discovery, citation, and reuse. Identifiers also play an essential role for the humanities. They need to be as unique and persistent as possible to enable stable links to the object and support citation and reuse to be tracked. Accessible data objects can be obtained by humans and machines upon appropriate authorization and access conditions, and through a well-defined and standardized communication protocols. In other words, anyone with a computer and an internet connection should be able to access at least the metadata. To make metadata accessible, we have 4 guidelines. First, choose a trustworthy repository. A certified repository offers a trustworthy deposit for datasets. Certification ensures the quality of the key responsibilities and criteria aligned with and supportive of the FAIR principle, although a different technology is used, so data are stored safely and will be available, findable, and accessible over the long term. Examples of certification standards are Core Trust Seal and Nestor. So for data producer and researcher, the recommendation is to make data accessible throughout a trustworthy repository following the repository standards on preferred file formats, metadata, and schema. For cultural heritage institutions and research institutions, clearly state the level of certification on the website. And if you are not yet certified, state how you plan to ensure availability, findability, accessibility, and reusability in the long term. The second recommendation is clearly state accessibility, that it means to provide access information on how a data user may access a dataset. When depositing data in a data repository, it should be clear which access options a data depositor can choose. For data producer, the recommendation is to consider legal requirements, discipline-specific policies, and ethics protocols when they are choosing an access option. Choose open access when possible. The FAIR principle should be implemented in combination with a policy requirement that research data should be open by default, that is, open unless there is a good reason for restricting access or reuse. So for example, when you collect personal data, ask yourself whether it contains any information which might lead to participants' identities being disclosed, what participants consented to, and which measure you have taken to protect your data. If your data cannot be published in open access, the metadata should be allowing data discovery. For data archivists, encourage metadata to be published in open access and clearly state restricted access options for sensitive metadata that should be not part of the public accessible metadata. In this case, strive to make the metadata available throughout a controlled and documented access procedure. Then we have a recommendation on use a data embargo when needed. In quite a few cases, researchers should like to deposit and publish metadata about the project data, but also be able to specify an embargo period. For example, a period of time during which the data are not openly available. During a data embargo period, only the description of the data sets is published. The data themselves are not accessible, and the full metadata will become available after a certain period of time. So for data producer, clearly state why and for what period a data embargo is needed. Make the metadata openly available as soon as possible. For data archive, the recommendation is to specify whether a data embargo is allowed and what conditions apply. The last recommendation for making data accessible is to use standardized exchange protocols. In order to be fully accessible, research data should be fully accessible via free exchange protocols. The most known in digital archiving repository is the OIPMH protocol. In the last few years, other protocols have become popular, such as the APIs, which allow retrieval of data from other repositories without the need to set up any data repository. Recommendations for data archive are to convert metadata schema into XML or RDF and maintain a registry for protocol endpoints, the path at which research data can be accessed, and publish them. So, to sum up, to make your data accessible, they should be stored in a trustworthy repository. Metadata should be public and available via standard protocols, and data should be open by default, but available under restriction when necessary. In recent European Commission formulation, the maxim as open as possible, as closed as necessary, has been introduced, which is an helpful articulation of the accessibility principle at play. So your research metadata can be standardized as possible, but if they can be accessed, they cannot be consulted and cited and reused. So interoperability is allowed to speed up discovery and uncover new insight. So research data should be easily combined with other data sets by human as well as computer systems. When we talk about interoperability, we include semantic and technical interoperability. That means that the data and related information is encoded using a standard that can be read on all applicable systems. A special care should be taken to articulate interoperability frameworks in ways that adopt common standards and enable brokering across disciplines to break down silos. To make interoperable, there are 6 guidelines. The first is to establish well-documented machine actionable APIs to allow for automatic indexing, retrieval, and combining of metadata from different data repositories. For data archives, the recommendation is to document APIs as well and make it possible to deliver the schema of the metadata model. Consider presenting examples of how to retrieve data from different endpoints and combine them into new data sets usable for new research purposes. The second guideline is for interoperability is to use open and well-defined vocabularies for the description of metadata elements. Such vocabularies should describe the exact meaning of the concepts and qualities of the data represent. So data producers should use vocabularies relevant to their discipline. Meanwhile, data archives should provide examples of vocabularies the research community may use based on research domain specifics. Then we have to support interoperability. It's crucial to document metadata models. Clearly, in documenting metadata models helps developers to compare and make mappings between metadata schemas. Data archives and cultural heritage institutions should publish the metadata models in use, documenting technical specification and defining classes and properties that are elements that express the attributes of the metadata section, as well as the relationship between different parts of the metadata. For allowing metadata mapping, they should remember to list the mandatory and the recommended properties. The next guideline is prescribe and use interoperable data standards. To use the data standards adopted by a strong community increases the possibility to share, reuse, and combine data collection. So data archives should clearly specify which data standard the institution uses, pull a community around them, and maintain them, especially with a perspective on interoperability. The next point is establish processes to enhance data quality. To boost metadata quality and therefore interoperability, is advisable to establish automatic processes that clean up, derive, and enrich metadata. For data producer, the recommendation is to adopt procedures to minimize the risk of mistakes in collecting data. For example, by choosing a date from a calendar instead of filling it by hand. And to data archives, to invest in tools to clean up metadata and to convert data into standardized and interoperable data formats. Also to adopt workflows and software solutions for such automatic process, for example, using machine learning tools, it helps. The last recommendation for making data interoperable is prescribe and use future-proof file formats. It is crucial that all data files collected in data repository should be in an open, international, standardized file format to ensure long-term interoperability in terms of usability, accessibility, and sustainability. This enables others to reuse them as the format is in a widespread use and software is available to read the files. Open and well-documented formats are easier to preserve. We therefore recommend to data producer to think about future-proof file formats from the beginning of the research process. Use preferred formats which are recommended by the data repository and are independent of specific software developers or vendors. For data archives, it is strategic to encourage the use of open formats that are considered suitable for the long-term preservation, such as PDF and CSV. Provide an easy-to-find and detailed overview of accepted file formats on the website. So the focus on interoperability is allowing data exchange and reuse between researchers, institutions, organizations, or countries, taking into account both syntactically parsable and semantically understandable. Make your data interoperable by using common standard, controlled vocabulary and ontology, thesauri where possible, APIs to support the researchers who want to connect their data with other data, and enable machine actionable. Research data should be ready for future research and future processing, making it self-evident that findings can be replicated and new research effectively builds on already acquired previous results. To make data reusable, we have 5 guidelines. The first is document data systematically. To make clear that can and what cannot be expected in a dataset or repository, data should be systematically documented, being transparent about what's in the data and what is in facilities, trust, and data reuse. Data producer should provide codebooks, including a description of the research methodology, a list of abbreviations, and a description of gaps in the data, and the setup of the database and other relevant information. Then the second recommendation is about following a precise and consistent naming convention that allows researchers to retrieve and access their digital objects and data more easily. Digital archives and repositories have usually best practice in place to create and apply specific naming file convention. We suggest to refer to the policies and the best practice for each discipline and to find the most suitable naming convention for your research and archive. The third is use common file formats, preferable using open and de facto standards that are widely used and well documented so reusability is increased. So the recommendation is to use current popular file format to share data like Excel, CSV, or ESRI shaped files. The fourth guideline is about maintaining data integrity. This general principle refers to the necessity to maintain the richness and the context of the data created and collected during time. Research data which were collected should be identical to the research data which are accessed later on. To ensure data authenticity checks for data integrity should be performed, and data producer should implement a method for version control. The guarantee that every change in a revised version of a dataset is correctly documented is of integral importance for the authenticity of each dataset. Data archives should identify if a file has been modified. Moreover, it is essential to record the provenance, the origin of the data, plus any change made over time, and to compare any copy with the original. Data integrity check can be performed by means of a fingerprint, such as a checksum, or by a direct comparison of 2 files. For this purpose, provide a mechanism to address different versions, for example, by adding a version to the identifier as a research parameter. The last guideline to make data reusable is about license for reuse. Reusability also requires that the data be realized with a clear and accessible data user license. In other words, the condition under which the data can be used should be transparent to both humans and machines. To permit the widest reuse possible of metadata, it should be clear who the metadata rights holder is and what license applies. So, data producer, make sure you know who the metadata rights holder is before publishing your research data. And data archives should communicate the metadata licenses and the reuse options transparently and in a machine-readable format. To improve interoperability, try to map your license to frameworks which are already widely adopted, such as Creative Commons or rights statement. So the focus on make your data reusable is to ensure the data can be correctly interpreted and reanalyzed by data. As a main message for making here we have that the FAIR principle reassert the need for rich metadata and documentation about provenance. Data need to be well documented, and it has a clear license and provenance information. That is much important for humanities data that are all about interpretation. So here, Franco.
Yeah, yes, I think that Sara explained all the content of this booklet. It's a very high-level guide, so it does not explain fully the implementation, but can be a useful introduction to the implementation of FAIR principles. It is freely downloadable as a PDF file from the link you see in the slide. Sara, next slide, please.
Sorry. No.
We are almost done.
Yes, but doesn't go to the next.
Never mind. I
Adina,
think that
could you?
Yeah, don't worry. It's, there is nothing substantial, so we may
I don't know.
move on.
Henning, can you go? I
We
don't know why it doesn't work, the command.
That doesn't matter because this is the final slide, so it doesn't matter if we can move to the questions. I have noticed that there is already one question in the. Yeah. Oh well. Okay. The important information is that the guidelines have been translated in several languages, so you can, if you want to distribute to your colleagues, they may perhaps find their own language. There are also other interesting training modules concerning these broadly topics, which you can find in the link here. And I think that with this we are done, really.
Yes, now we go to the MentiMeter questions.
Not quite. Now, first of all, we have one question.
Yeah, sorry.
One question from the participants, and if anybody else has any questions now at the last minute, please either type them into the chat or into the Google document that's been circulated to enter questions. We have one question, however, and I guess this is probably for Franco first, but
yes,
for both.
Yes.
Effie, I'll read it out. Okay, it's from Effie Patsatsi of the Karari Consortium. Question is there an intention to explore possible differences between research data sets and cultural heritage data with a view to customize the Parthenos guidelines to suit best the latest? I guess that means the most recent.
Yes, the answer would be pretty long, so I'll try to make it as short as possible. Cultural heritage data come from different sources. One is research, and this has been discussed in this webinar, but many of them are produced by public bodies, not as a research, but as a result of management, for example, conservation or just preservation or census of all the cultural heritage in a country. So they're very often produced by governments or by public agencies. As such, they are regulated by the PSI directive, which has been recently updated last year in 2019, and it has defined high-value datasets. Such high-value datasets at present do not include cultural heritage data, but there is an open consultation by the Commission to discuss this definition of high-value datasets. Such high-value datasets would be open and would probably need to see an adaptation of the FAIR principles also to them. So the question is still open. There is ongoing work on that. I think we should participate in this consultation and express our opinions. Last but not least, there are also data produced by private institutions which must comply with the national regulations about that. So, interesting question. We have no final answer. Probably and possibly, if there is enough pressure from the community public data produced by public bodies should also be open, and a modified version of the FAIR principles should apply also to them. And it is an invitation to everybody to look for this open consultation, which has been managed by the European Commission.
Okay, thank you very much, Franco. In case there are no other questions, which there don't seem to be, I have one which I'd like to put before we go to MentiMeter. To both Sara and to Franco, and Sara in particular, I think, who went through the guidelines for each of the 4 bits of the FAIR principles. It particularly concerns, from my point of view, the ones to do with interoperability and reuse, but it may apply to any of them. The guidelines that you presented today, are they specifically relevant from, as you intend them, for cultural heritage data, humanities data, or are they applicable across all this? Are those guidelines the same or similar across all of the science fields that may be known to humanity, as it were? Are they generic to every field, especially in terms of interoperability and reuse? I.e., are they for cultural heritage? Yeah.
Yes, they are based on, of course, on the general recommendation for interoperability. But the work that we have done in Parthenos is to find out also some specific standards and protocols that are used and managed by the cultural heritage institutions and the humanities and social disciplines. So the specificity are on citing these specific standards and methods and workflow that are adopted by these communities. So for example, in the training section, you can find more information about this specificity, because the problem that we try to figure out with Parthenos is to make this similar and interrelated sector, but very often separated. We try to make a communication for improving interoperability within this sector. So yes, there are some, the guidelines are intended to take into account this specific sector. This is the answer.
Thank you very much, Sara. Thank you. Henning, can I hand over to you now? Are you ready with the MentiMeter?
Yeah, hello everyone. Yes, I am. If Sara stops presenting, or maybe I can make her stop presenting. Yeah, then I can. You know us probably, or for those of you knowing us, we like MentiMeter a lot, and if you can go to menti.com and use the code that I just put into the Slack, or wait a second, I'm going to share my screen. Use this one, and then I'm going to present. Yes, I hope you see my screen now. And again, for those of you not there yet, either use your phone or a second browser window or so, and go to menti.com and use the code 409833. And we have a couple of questions, maybe also to trigger a bit of a discussion. Maybe this will lead to some more questions from some of you about the Parthenos guidelines, or FAIR in a more general sense. And yeah, as we heard about the Parthenos guidelines today, yeah, thanks Sara and Franco for introducing this to us. But I know that there are certainly also probably a couple of other initiatives around that are also working on FAIR. And if you know a few of them, maybe just to warm up, if you can start entering them in here to make others maybe also aware, and just type in something and text will pop up. You can also enter multiple times if you have things in mind. So far, it's only one. gofair.org.
Henning, can you repeat the code, because probably I mistyped it.
The code is here on the upper end of the screen. It's 4098.
That one. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. 409833. Well, there is.
Okay, seems that. Okay, the commission, EC, I assume, is a commission. The commission has also an approach into this. That's interesting. Fair is fair. Now things are popping up. Ariadne Plus. Okay. Anyone else, or anyone maybe with specific questions over Go Fair now the second time, over one of those things mentioned here? RDA, Fair Data Maturity Model. Okay. By the way, the results of this will also be shared afterwards. So for those of you that want to look into this and want to remember what's on those slides, you can then also go back to that and check this out. Let's go to the next question, because I'm not sure how. Two more. The next question, if you move on, I hope that works. I'm not sure how new or experienced all of you are in the FAIR world, so would be curious to know who of you is actually actively working on verifying your data. So are you working on this already and are more or less done? Are you in the progress of doing so? Are you just about to start? Or you have not done this so far, and maybe that webinar was a way for you to get inspired on doing this. Okay, so we have a bit of diversity in here. Two already that have done the job, and it seems no one really has never worked on this before. That's also good. Okay. A couple of that are about to start. That's good to know. And maybe something, yeah, looking at this, seeing that we have a few people also that have done this already, and others that are about to start. I can imagine that there are lessons learned from one group, the pink one, or what is it? Purple, pink? Yeah, those type of colors are always very difficult. And the yellow group may benefit from learning this experience, but maybe also now looking to the next question. It's a good transition to this one. In particular, for those that are still in the start process, what would you need in addition to guidelines like the PARTHENOS guidelines? Is it additional training? Is it tools, case studies, money, or maybe you want to talk to the group of people that have have learned their lessons already. This should now, if you just enter a word or two or so, and that will change into a word cloud. Maybe that would help us to see if there's a kind of a something that pops out to be most required. So money and tools seem to be in the center. Institutional policy, clever management, interesting infrastructure. If anyone, like any of you that are putting things in, would like to maybe elaborate on one or the other, would also be interesting to know. Like if you want to, if tools seem to be a very popular thing, does anyone of you that ask for tools have specific tools in mind or a specific need, or you can also speak up. Training is now becoming popular. Interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe it's something that we could discuss or follow up afterwards. Like if as it seems, a couple of experienced people on the call, to think about how they can help the less experienced one. Are there
Henning,
yeah.
if I may comment, I am very pleased to see that money disappeared from this. This is a usual excuse. We don't have money. We don't have time. But this is a very good result, because training also means making people aware of this, the importance of the FAIR principles. And so it's a good signal, in my opinion.
Yes, it's true. Like, yeah, money became smaller over the voting. It's only nine people, but still, everyone wants to have tools and training. So that's hopefully something that the initiatives can provide. And I think I have a last question, because you may know that Europeana has also invested in this, and there are people working on this. So I would like to know if you or who would be interested to learn how Europeana meets the FAIR requirements, and what we can do with that. And yeah, I think the answer is obvious. It's that's good to see. Again, 9 votes. So yeah, that sounds like this is an action or a follow-up that would be for us in the office to start thinking about with our colleagues what we can do, and we will look into this, and hopefully can come back to this in a while. And we will then announce it to you. I hope at least that we have that with your registration for this webinar, we've also collected your email address, so we could keep you maybe posted on what is coming as a follow-up on this. Yeah, thanks for that.